So, I'm not really the type of person to mess around with sketchy shit. Like, I've always been cautious about my decisions online. I mean, I know the internet's a dangerous place, but I've always been kind of curious about the deeper parts of it, you know? I guess we all have that morbid curiosity. Anyway, about 6 months ago, my life took a turn I never expected. I can't believe I'm even typing this, but I need to get it out. Maybe someone else will learn from my mistake. Maybe. I guess I should start by saying that I was never really into the dark web. I knew about it, of course. You can't spend much time online without hearing stories about it, but I'd always been too nervous to actually explore it. It just seemed like a bad idea. But one night, I was bored as hell and alone in my apartment. It was one of those nights where you've seen everything on Netflix, and nothing seems interesting. So, I started reading up on some forums about the dark web just to pass the time. It started innocently enough. Stories about weird but relatively harmless stuff like hacked Spotify accounts and bootleg DVDs. But as I went deeper into the rabbit hole, I started reading stories about the more sinister side of things. Hitmen for hire, human trafficking, organ sales, all the worst shit you could think of. And I don't know why, but it didn't scare me off. It just made me more curious. Like, how the hell do people even find this stuff? That's when I found the link. It was buried in some obscure thread, with a vague title that just said something like, "Check this out if you dare." No one had commented on it, but it had a decent number of upvotes, so I figured it was worth a look. I clicked on it without thinking twice, expecting maybe just some sketchy marketplace or a forum. It wasn't. The link took me to a completely black page. No text, no images, nothing. I thought maybe the site was broken or something, but then I noticed a small white box appear in the middle of the screen. It was a chat window. There was no username, no profile pic, just a blinking cursor like someone was waiting for me to type. I hesitated, but like an idiot, I just typed, "Hello?"
The response came almost instantly. "Are you ready to see something you can't unsee?" That should have been my first clue to back the fuck out. But no, I stayed, thinking it was probably just some dumb prank or an attempt to scare people off. I typed back, "Sure, why not?" Then the page changed. Suddenly it wasn't just a black screen anymore. There was a video and it was already playing. The quality was shit, but I could make out the scene. It looked like some kind of basement or a cellar. There was a single chair in the middle of the room, lit by a bare light bulb hanging from the ceiling. But what really caught my attention was the man sitting in the chair. He was tied up. His face was bruised and bloody, and his shirt was soaked with sweat. He looked terrified, like his eyes were practically bulging out of his skull. I remember thinking it had to be fake because it seemed way too real. I mean, his breathing was so labored, you could almost hear the panic through the screen. Then a shadow appeared on the right side of the video. Someone else was in the room. The camera was focused on the man in the chair, so I couldn't see who it was, but I could tell by the way the tied-up guy reacted. He started thrashing in the chair like he was trying to scream, but there was something in his mouth. A gag or duct tape, I don't know. That's when the figure stepped into view. They were wearing a mask, some creepy, featureless mask that looked like a doll's face. No expression, just smooth plastic where a face should be. The figure walked up to the man and pulled out a knife. It wasn't some clean kitchen knife or a military-style weapon. It was an old, rusty blade that looked like it had been used 100 times. I could almost smell the metal through the screen. The man in the chair started to cry, I think. His whole body was shaking, and then the figure slowly dragged the knife across his arm, cutting him open in one clean line from his wrist to his elbow. The blood poured out like a faucet, and the man was screaming through the gag, but the figure didn't care. It was slow, methodical. They weren't killing him, just torturing him, playing with him. At that point, I wanted to close the window. I really did, but I couldn't. My hand was hovering over the mouse, and I just couldn't bring myself to click out of it. I don't know if it was shock or morbid curiosity, but I was glued to the screen, and the video kept going. The figure continued cutting. His legs, his chest, his face. Each slice was slow, deliberate, like they were savoring it. The guy in the chair was almost unconscious at this point, his head drooping forward, but he wasn't dead. Not yet. and then the figure pulled out something else. It looked like a pair of pliers. They reached out and grabbed the man's hand, gripping one of his fingers in the pliers, and then they started pulling. I'll never forget the sound. It was this sickening crunch as the bone gave way, and they just yanked his finger right off. Blood sprayed everywhere, and the man's eyes rolled back into his head. I thought he had died right then and there, but they just kept going, pulling finger after finger off his hand, and each time, that same horrific noise echoed through my speakers. I wanted to throw up. My stomach was churning, my hands were shaking, but for some reason, I still couldn't close the fucking window. And then it stopped. The figure walked out of frame, leaving the guy slumped in the chair, barely alive. I thought the video was over, but then something happened that made my blood run cold. The camera zoomed in on the man's face, and suddenly there was a voice. "You've watched this far. Now it's your turn." The screen went black. I sat there, staring at my reflection in the monitor, trying to process what the fuck I had just watched. I was shaking, sweating, my heart pounding in my chest. I closed the browser, slammed my laptop shut, and just sat there, trying to convince myself it was fake, some elaborate hoax to scare people. But then my phone buzzed. I picked it up, and there was a message from an unknown number. It just said, "We're watching." At that point, I freaked out. I had used a VPN, Tor browser, everything to keep myself hidden. There's no way they could have known who I was, right? But the message was there, staring me in the face, mocking me. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. Every noise in my apartment felt like someone breaking in. Every shadow seemed to move, and I was constantly checking my windows, my doors, everything. But nothing happened. Not that night, anyway. The next morning, I thought maybe I'd just been hacked. Maybe someone had found my number through some shady program or something. I deleted the message, reset my phone, and tried to put it out of my mind. But deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. A few days later, I got another message. This time, it wasn't just a text, it was a video, and when I opened it, it was a video of me. Alright, so after that first night, I thought things couldn't get worse. I thought maybe I was just being paranoid, Like maybe this was some messed up prank or phishing scheme, and they were just trying to scare me into giving them money or something. I tried to rationalize it every way I could because the alternative, that someone had found me, had real access to me, was just too horrifying to accept. But when I got that video, I knew I was screwed. It was late again. I'd spent most of the day trying to move on, telling myself I'd overreacted. But when I saw the new message pop up on my phone, my heart dropped. I didn't recognize the number, of course. It wasn't saved in my contacts. Hell, it wasn't even a normal number. It was just a random string of letters and numbers. And the video? Yeah, it was a short clip of me. It was me, sitting at my desk in my apartment, watching that damn torture video from the night before. The angle of the shot. I still get chills thinking about it. The camera wasn't in my apartment. It wasn't set up anywhere near me. It was recording me through my laptop screen. I could see myself, hunched over, the faint glow of my laptop illuminating my face, the exact moment I was watching that man get butchered. And right then, it hit me. These sick fucks had access to my webcam. They'd been watching me the whole time. I slammed my laptop shut so hard I thought I broke it, and I just sat there breathing heavily, freaking out. I checked my phone again. The message had disappeared, just gone from my inbox like it was never there. That's when I knew. I wasn't just dealing with some ordinary hacker. These guys were pros. They knew exactly what they were doing. I was losing it at this point. I unplugged everything. My router, my phone charger, my smart speaker, even my TV. Anything that could be connected to the internet, I disconnected. I was pacing around my apartment trying to figure out what to do. Do I go to the cops? Tell them I was stupid enough to watch some dark web video and now people were spying on me? They wouldn't believe me. Hell, they'd probably confiscate my laptop and label me a suspect in something. So I decided to do nothing. Yeah, I know, brilliant move. I couldn't sleep again. I spent the whole night jumping at every little sound, thinking someone was about to break in and finish what they started. I barely managed to doze off around sunrise, but even then, it wasn't real sleep. It was more like passing out from sheer exhaustion. When I woke up the next day, everything felt normal, like way too normal. The paranoia from the night before hadn't fully left me, but I was starting to think maybe they were done with me. Maybe they'd gotten their sick thrill by scaring me and decided to move on to someone else. I had no messages on my phone, no weird emails, nothing. I spent the next few days avoiding my laptop like it was radioactive. I still couldn't bring myself to touch it, not after that video. Every time I thought about it, I just got that same sick feeling in my gut. So, I did the only thing I could think of. I went out. I tried to pretend things were fine. I grabbed a coffee, went to the gym, hit up a bar, anything to get out of my apartment. But it didn't matter. Because wherever I went, they were there. It started small. I was at the coffee shop, sitting by the window, and I noticed a guy in a dark hoodie sitting a few tables over. He wasn't doing anything weird, just sipping his drink, scrolling on his phone. But the way he was sitting, his body language was off. He was angled toward me, almost like he was watching me without making it obvious. I brushed it off as paranoia until I saw him again later that day, outside the gym, leaning against the wall, staring right at me as I walked out. Now keep in mind, this guy wasn't doing anything aggressive. He wasn't following me. Not that I could tell anyway. He was just there. And it wasn't just him. I started seeing other people too. Men and women, always dressed casually, blending into crowds, but somehow always looking in my direction. And I swear, sometimes they'd smirk, like they knew something I didn't. The worst part, none of them ever approached me. They just watched, everywhere I went. I told myself I was losing my mind, that I was just hyper alert after what happened online. But it wasn't until the third day that I couldn't deny it anymore. I was at the grocery store trying to act normal, and I got this sinking feeling in my gut. I looked up from the cereal aisle, and there, about 20 feet away, was a man just standing there holding a bag of chips, not moving, not pretending to shop, just standing perfectly still, staring at me.
That's when I dropped everything and bolted. I didn't even pay for my groceries. I just left the cart in the middle of the aisle and got the hell out of there. I ran straight to my car, locked the doors, and sped home like my life depended on it. When I got home, my phone buzzed again. It was another message from that same weird number. This time, it wasn't a video. It was a picture. A picture of me standing outside my car, looking panicked as hell in the grocery store parking lot, taken just minutes before. The caption read, "You can't run from us." At that point, I lost it. I threw my phone across the room, screaming, cursing, losing my mind. I started searching my entire apartment, convinced they'd planted cameras. I tore through every drawer, ripped down pictures, flipped over furniture. I even ripped open my mattress, thinking there'd be something hidden inside. But I found nothing. Nothing but my own desperation. I didn't know what to do. I was trapped. These people, whoever they were in my life now. Watching me, taunting me, and I had no idea what they wanted. For the next week, I basically lived like a ghost. I barely left my apartment, and when I did, I'd wear a hoodie, sunglasses, whatever I could to cover my face. I didn't use my phone except to check if they'd sent more messages, which of course they did. Always pictures of me, taken from God knows where. They knew everything, where I went, who I talked to. One time, I went to visit my parents just to try and clear my head, and when I came home that night, there was a picture waiting for me. It was of my parents' front door, taken while I was inside their house. I started having nightmares too. Night after night, I'd dream of being tied to that same chair from the video, with the figure in the mask standing over me, knife in hand, slicing me open, pulling out my fingers one by one. But the worst part wasn't the torture. No, it was the feeling of being watched, helpless, with no way out. The dreams started blending into my waking life. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that fucking mask, that blank, featureless face. And the sound, the sickening sound of bone crunching and skin tearing, it haunted me. Sometimes I'd wake up in the middle of the night, swearing I heard someone in my apartment, only to find it empty. But I knew they were still watching. And then, one night, I woke up to something that wasn't a dream. There was a knock on my door. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. I froze in bed, my heart racing. It was 3 a.m., pitch black outside. No one should have been at my door. But the knocking continued. I didn't move, I didn't make a sound, but the knocking persisted. It felt like forever, and then finally, it stopped. I thought maybe I had imagined it. That maybe I was so far gone I was hallucinating. But then I got a text. It was a video. I opened it with shaking hands, and what I saw nearly stopped my heart. The video was of my apartment door, from the outside. And the caption read, "We're closer than you think." After that knock on the door, I completely lost it. I couldn't even pretend things were normal anymore. These people were getting bolder, more personal, and they clearly weren't done with me. That video of my front door, that was a message, one I couldn't ignore. They were outside, they were near, and they were playing with me. I couldn't sleep, I couldn't eat, I couldn't even function. The next morning I called in sick to work. Not that it mattered. I wasn't getting anything done anyway. My boss had already been asking questions about why I seemed so off lately, but I couldn't tell him the truth. "Oh, I'm sorry, Steve. I'm just being stalked by some psycho group from the dark web." Yeah, that would go over well.
Instead, I just locked myself in my apartment. I thought about calling the cops again. I almost did. I even dialed 911 but hung up before the call connected. They wouldn't believe me, or worse, they'd come to my place, confiscate my phone, my laptop, ask a ton of questions about what I'd been doing online. What was I going to say? I was watching a guy get mutilated, and now the same people are after me. I didn't want to end up on some list or in a padded room, so I stayed quiet. I thought if I just lay low, maybe they'd lose interest. Maybe they'd move on to someone else. But they didn't. That night, things escalated in a way I wasn't ready for. I was sitting on my couch, the lights off, TV on for background noise but muted. I hadn't touched my laptop in days, and my phone was face down on the coffee table. I didn't want to see any more messages or videos. I just wanted to be left alone. I kept telling myself that if I ignored them, they'd get bored. That's when I heard it. At first, I thought it was just my paranoia again. A faint shuffling sound, something moving outside my apartment door. I told myself it was just my neighbors coming home late, but deep down, I knew that wasn't it. It was too deliberate, too close. I stood up slowly, creeping toward the door as quietly as I could. My heart was pounding in my ears and my palms were sweaty. I don't know why I didn't just stay where I was, but it's like my body moved on its own, like I had to see what was out there. I pressed my eye to the peephole, expecting to see nothing, just the empty hallway like always. But I didn't see nothing. There was a figure standing right there, barely a foot from my door. I couldn't make out any details, just a dark silhouette, but it was someone standing perfectly still. They weren't knocking, they weren't trying to get in. They were just standing there facing my door, watching. I stumbled back from the door, trying to keep quiet, but I must have made some noise because the next thing I knew, there was a soft tap, tap, tap on the door. The same slow, deliberate knocks from the night before. Not loud enough to wake my neighbors, just loud enough to let me know they were there. I froze. My heart was racing so fast I thought I might pass out. I didn't know what to do. Call the cops. But what would I say? There's someone standing outside my door. By the time they got here, the person would be long gone. They were playing with me, taunting me. I couldn't give them the satisfaction of knowing they'd scared me, so I stayed completely still, waiting for them to leave. But then I heard something else. A faint scratching sound, like nails scraping across wood. I looked back at the door and saw the doorknob, slowly turning. They were trying to get in. My apartment is small, so I didn't have anywhere to hide. I bolted into my bedroom and locked the door, grabbing a baseball bat I kept under my bed. Yeah, like a fucking bat was going to help me against these people. But it was all I had. I stood there, shaking, bat in hand, staring at the bedroom door, waiting for them to come through the front door. But then, nothing. No footsteps, no more scratching, just silence. I stood there for what felt like hours, my body tense, listening for any sound at all. And eventually, I convinced myself that they had left. Maybe they were just trying to scare me. Maybe they didn't actually want to get inside. But when I opened the bedroom door, I realized I was wrong. Dead wrong. The front door was open, not wide open, but enough that I could see the crack of the hallway light spilling in. I knew I had locked it. There was no way I'd forgotten. And yet somehow, they had gotten in. I stepped into the living room, bat still in hand, my whole body shaking. Every corner of my apartment felt wrong, like I was stepping into someone else's space. But there was no one there. The room was empty. They had already been and gone. And that's when I noticed my laptop. It was sitting on the coffee table right where I'd left it. Except now, it was open. The screen was on, and there was something playing. I crept closer, terrified of what I'd find, but unable to stop myself. When I finally saw what was on the screen, my stomach dropped. It was another video. But this one wasn't from the dark web. It wasn't from some basement with a faceless torturer. No, this one was from inside my apartment. The camera was shaky, like it had been filmed by someone holding a phone, walking through my living room, past my kitchen, and into my bedroom. The exact path I had taken when I'd run from the door. It was filmed from their point of view, the person who had been inside my home. And the worst part? They filmed me. Standing in the bedroom, clutching the bat, shaking like a leaf. They were right there, just a few feet away, and I had no idea. Then the camera slowly panned up to the ceiling, focusing on a tiny black object I hadn't noticed before. A camera. They had planted a fucking camera in my apartment. And not just one, I realized. As I looked around the room, I saw them. Tiny black dots, almost impossible to see unless you were looking for them, all over my apartment. In the living room, in the kitchen, even in the fucking bathroom. They had been watching me this whole time. I rushed to my laptop and slammed it shut, as if that would somehow make the nightmare stop. But it didn't. My phone buzzed again. This time, I didn't want to check it. I didn't want to see what else they had to show me. But my hands moved on their own, and I picked it up. Another video, but this one was different. It wasn't a recording of me, it was a live feed from inside my parents' house. The camera was in their living room, pointed at my mom sitting on the couch, reading a book, completely oblivious to what was happening. I dropped the phone, my vision blurring as panic set in. How did they know where my parents lived? How did they get inside their house? I wanted to call them, warn them, do something, but I didn't know what these people were capable of. If I called the cops, would they hurt my parents? If I went there myself, would I just be putting them in more danger? I was completely paralyzed, not knowing what to do. And that's when the final message came through. We can get to anyone, anytime. It wasn't a threat. It was a statement of fact. They had already proved it. They were in control. I was just a pawn in whatever twisted game they were playing. I wasn't safe. My family wasn't safe. No one was. And then the phone buzzed again, one last time. It was another picture. This time, it was of me, sitting in my living room, reading the message, taken from inside the apartment. They were in here right now. I can't even begin to explain the level of terror I felt after seeing that picture. The realization that someone had been inside my apartment just a few feet away, watching me, taking pictures, while I was right there, it completely broke me. I was shaking so bad I could barely stand. My first instinct was to get out, to run, but where the hell was I supposed to go? They were everywhere. They had access to everything. Still, I couldn't just sit there. I grabbed the keys off the counter and bolted out of my apartment. I didn't have a plan. I didn't even know if I was safer outside or not, but I needed to get the hell away from those cameras, from them. My heart was pounding as I raced down the stairs of my building. I wasn't waiting for the elevator, no way. I felt like any second someone was going to grab me from behind, like I was being hunted. I practically threw myself into my car and locked the doors, my hands shaking so badly I could barely fit the key into the ignition. I didn't even know where I was driving, I just needed to move. Somewhere far, somewhere they couldn't reach me. But the thing is, they could reach me anywhere. I was halfway down the highway, hands clenched on the steering wheel, when my phone buzzed again. That goddamn sound. I didn't want to look at it, but my mind was racing. What if it was another video? What if they were at my parents' house? I couldn't ignore it. So, with one hand on the wheel, I picked it up and glanced at the screen. It was a text message. Short, simple, 3 words. Look behind you.
I nearly crashed the car. My stomach dropped so hard it felt like I was going to throw up. I swerved onto the shoulder, slamming on the brakes, my heart pounding so loud I could barely hear anything else. I sat there for a minute, staring straight ahead, frozen with terror. I didn't want to turn around. I didn't want to know what was back there, but slowly I forced myself to do it. I turned in my seat, every muscle in my body tense, ready to see someone crouched in the back seat, a knife at my throat. But there was no one. The back seat was empty. Relief washed over me for a split second, until I noticed something. My backpack, the one I had brought with me when I left the apartment in such a rush, it had been unzipped, and I sure as hell hadn't touched it. My breathing hitched as I reached back, pulling the bag into the front seat, trying to keep my hands steady. I opened it, and right on top of my stuff, sitting there like a twisted little gift, was a phone. Not my phone, a different phone, one I had never seen before. It was one of those cheap burner phones, the kind you buy at a gas station for cash. My fingers shook as I picked it up. I didn't want to touch it, didn't want to know what it meant, but there was already a message on the screen, waiting for me. "You're not far enough?" That's when I completely lost it. I threw the phone into the passenger seat, screaming at the top of my lungs, pounding my fists against the steering wheel. They had been in my car, in my fucking car. I was trapped no matter where I went, no matter how fast or how far I drove. They were always ahead of me, always watching. I had no idea what they wanted. I didn't know if this was some kind of sadistic game, or if they were going to kill me. Or worse, kill my family. I couldn't think straight. I didn't even know if I could trust going to the police. These people were connected. I didn't know how deep this went. I had no idea who I was really dealing with. I decided to go to the only place that made sense in my panic. The one place where I thought I could be safe, where maybe they couldn't reach me. My parents' house. I knew it wasn't smart, knew that I might be leading these psychos right to my family, but I couldn't think of anywhere else. At least I wouldn't be alone. It was late by the time I got there. Their lights were still on, but everything looked calm, peaceful, like nothing was wrong. I parked a little down the street, hoping that maybe if these people were watching, they wouldn't immediately see me. I crept toward the house, my whole body tense. Every shadow looked like someone waiting to grab me, but I kept moving. I knocked softly on the door, praying my parents would just let me in without asking too many questions. My mum opened the door, her face lighting up when she saw me. I tried to force a smile, but I must have looked like hell because her expression quickly turned to concern. "What's wrong? What's going on?" she asked, stepping aside so I could come in. I didn't know where to start. Something happened. It's complicated, Mum. I need to stay here for a bit." She didn't push me. She could tell something was seriously wrong, but she didn't ask any more questions. Not yet, anyway. I went straight to the guest room, closing the door behind me. For the first time in days, I felt a tiny bit of relief. At least here, I was with my parents. It felt safer somehow. But that didn't last long. I sat down on the bed, staring at my phone, dreading the next message. The burner phone was still in my car, but I kept expecting something to happen. Another video. Another picture. I tried to breathe, tried to calm down. but I was on edge, every little noise making me jump. I barely slept that night, but when I woke up, everything seemed normal. My mum was in the kitchen, cooking breakfast like it was any other day. My dad was reading the paper. I tried to act like nothing was wrong, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. And that's when I noticed it. There was a small black device attached to the back of the guest room door. I hadn't seen it the night before, but now that it was daylight, I could see it clearly. A tiny camera, just like the ones they had put in my apartment.
I backed away from the door, my mind spinning. They had been here before I even got here. These sick bastards had been in my parents' house planting cameras, watching them just like they'd watched me. I tore the camera down, my hands shaking as I ran into the kitchen. I didn't want to freak my parents out, but I couldn't keep this to myself anymore. "Mom, Dad, we need to leave, right now." My mom turned to me, confused. "What are you talking about?" "We're not safe here. There's someone watching us." She stared at me like I was crazy, and for a second I thought maybe I was losing my mind, but I held up the tiny camera, showing it to them. "They've been in the house, Mom. They've been watching us." My dad stood up, his face pale. "Who's been watching us?" "I don't know," I admitted, my voice shaking. "But they're everywhere. They're in my apartment. They're here. They've been following me." I could see the fear spreading across their faces. My dad grabbed his phone, about to call the police, but I stopped him. "No. They'll know. They have access to everything. If we call the cops, I don't know what they'll do. We need to leave. We need to get out of here, go somewhere they can't find us." But deep down, I knew there was nowhere we could go. No matter how far we ran, they would always find us. My phone buzzed. I didn't want to look, but I had no choice. The message was short, just a few words. "We told you, now it's your turn." I dropped the phone, my whole body going numb. And then, the power went out. The entire house was plunged into darkness. The only light came from the pale glow of my phone on the kitchen counter, the screen still lit up with that ominous message. My mum screamed, and my dad ran for a flashlight. But I already knew what was happening. They were here. When the power went out, everything slowed down. I could hear my own heartbeat thudding in my ears, the panic rising in my throat. The house was completely dark, except for the faint glow of my phone still on the kitchen counter, that last message staring at me like a death sentence. "We told you, now it's your turn." I stood frozen in the kitchen, my hands shaking so bad I thought I might drop the flashlight my dad had shoved into my hand. My mum was panicking, pacing around trying to make sense of what was happening, and my dad, well, he was trying to keep it together, but I could see it in his face. He knew, just like I did, that whoever these people were, they were already inside. They had been watching us for days, weeks maybe. They knew everything about me, about my family. There was no escaping them. I'd brought this nightmare right to my parents' doorstep. Suddenly, there was a loud bang from the back of the house. My mum screamed, and my dad rushed toward the sound, but I grabbed his arm. "Don't," I whispered, barely able to get the word out. "We don't know who, what, that is." He looked at me, fear in his eyes, but there was determination too. I knew he wanted to protect us, but I also knew that whatever was happening, there wasn't anything we could do. These people, whoever they were, weren't just messing with us anymore. They were here to finish what they started. Another bang, louder this time, followed by a scraping sound. It was coming from the back door. My mind flashed back to the torture video I'd watched on the dark web, the slow, deliberate way they'd toyed with their victim before. I shook the thought out of my head. I couldn't think about that now. I had to focus. The scraping sound grew louder, closer. It was metal against wood, like someone was dragging something heavy across the floor. I could feel my mum trembling next to me, her breath coming in shallow gasps, and my dad, standing at the front of the house, just stared at the hallway, waiting for the inevitable. I wanted to run. I wanted to grab them both and just run, but there was nowhere to go. Even if we made it outside, they'd find us. They'd always find us. And then the front door creaked open. It was slow, deliberate. The kind of sound that makes your stomach twist, knowing what's coming next but powerless to stop it. My dad whipped around, raising the flashlight toward the door, and that's when I saw it. A figure stepped into the house, dressed head to toe in black, wearing that same goddamn mask from the video. The blank, doll-like face. No eyes, no mouth, just smooth, featureless plastic. Behind the first figure there was another, then another. They all poured into the house one after another, moving silently like shadows. My dad screamed at them, holding up the flashlight like it was a weapon. "Get the hell out of my house!" But they didn't stop. They didn't say a word. They just moved forward, step by step, closing the distance between us. I was paralyzed. I wanted to move, to grab my parents and drag them out of there, but I couldn't. It was like my body had shut down, locked up by sheer terror. My mom clung to me, sobbing, begging me to do something, but I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to fight this. The first figure reached my dad, and before I could even blink, they grabbed him by the throat and slammed him against the wall. He dropped the flashlight, the beam spinning wildly across the room, casting long, eerie shadows. I heard my dad choke, gasping for air, his feet kicking uselessly against the floor as they pinned him there, their strength inhuman. "Stop, please!" I screamed, finally finding my voice. "We didn't do anything. Please just stop." But they didn't stop. They never spoke, never acknowledged us as anything more than prey. I felt my mum pull me back, tugging at my arm, trying to drag me toward the back of the house, but we barely made it 2 steps before one of them grabbed her too. The scream that came out of her wasn't human. I'll never forget that sound. It was raw, primal. I turned just in time to see the figure dragging her away, pulling her toward the hallway. I tried to fight. I swear to God I did, but they were too fast, too strong. My mum's fingers slipped out of mine, and before I knew it, she was gone, disappearing into the darkness.
I was next. 2 of them grabbed me by the arms, yanking me toward the living room. I kicked, screamed, tried to break free, but it was like fighting a brick wall. They didn't even flinch. I thought they were going to kill me right there, that they were going to do to me what I'd seen in that video, tear me apart piece by piece, but they didn't. Instead, they threw me onto the couch, pinning me down. I struggled, kicking and thrashing, but it was no use. I was trapped. The figure in front of me slowly reached into their pocket, pulling out a small handheld camera, and that's when I realized they were recording me. The camera's red light blinked on, casting an eerie glow on the mask in front of me. My heart stopped. This wasn't just about tormenting me anymore. They were making me the next victim in their sick game. They were going to do to me what I had seen them do to that man, only now it was for some twisted audience to watch. Just like I had. I thought about the video I'd watched, how I hadn't been able to look away, how I had chosen to see it. Now, I was the one being watched. I was the entertainment. I heard footsteps behind me, and before I could turn, something cold and sharp pressed against my neck. I froze, barely able to breathe. The blade of a knife was digging into my skin, the pressure light but deliberate. They were toying with me, savoring my fear. Tears filled my eyes. I couldn't stop them. This was it. This was how it was going to end. And then, the figure holding the knife leaned in close, their mask inches from my face. I could hear their breath, slow and steady, as they whispered one word.
Smile. They were recording my death, and they wanted me to smile for it. But just as the blade pressed harder, ready to cut, something happened. The front door burst open again, this time with a crash, and I heard voices, shouting, yelling, footsteps pounding through the house. I turned my head as much as I could, my vision blurring with panic and tears. It was the police. Blue and red lights flashed outside, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt a flicker of hope. The masked figures didn't move, didn't panic. They just stood there, watching me, like they had all the time in the world. The cops swarmed the house, guns drawn, shouting at them to get down, but the figures didn't react, not at first. Then one by one they turned and left. No resistance, no rush. They just walked out of the house like it was nothing, leaving me there bleeding and broken on the couch. I collapsed, gasping for air, my body shaking so badly I couldn't move. The cops rushed to me, checking if I was hurt, but I couldn't answer. I could barely think. My mum and dad, they didn't make it. I found out later that night. The figures had killed them both before the police could get inside. They had left me alive, but they had taken everything else. The cops never caught them. There was no trace of who they were, no evidence left behind, just the aftermath of what they had done. And the worst part? I'm still not safe. I know they're still out there. I know they're watching me, waiting. Every now and then, I still get messages. I still get videos. And each time, it's a reminder. I'm next.